This is my Project B5S4, and over the past few weeks I've done a lot of work to get this car working well mechanically. I've done enough work to get this car to be drivable. In fact, it's been rather reliable as I've taken it around the past few weeks. This week I have two primary goals for the S4. First and foremost, I want to learn how to do some paint restoration. As you can see, there are several spots on this car where the clear coat has been completely compromised and is peeling. This is something that really degrades the look of the vehicle, and it's something I want to sort out immediately now that the car is drivable. Before we get too in-depth into paint restoration, I want to replace this passenger door card. As you can see, the leather is completely peeled and dried out. Now, normally you'd think that buying just the leather to replace it would be the financial way to go, but I was actually able to source an entire door card for cheaper than I was able to source the actual replacement part. I think this has to do with the fact that the S4 has a bunch of very different interior options, and I just happened to get this one, and thankfully it was for sale online, so I picked it up. This isn't the only door card that needs replacing in this S4, however, this is by far and away the worst one, and coincidentally, it was the only one that was for sale on all of online that I could find, specifically that matched my white leather interior. I had absolutely no idea how easy it was to remove the door cards on a B5S4. They're held on by about 6 screws, and mine came off in about 2 minutes.
This is actually a lot easier than I thought it would be.
As soon as I had the door card unscrewed, it was really only being held on by the electrical adapters. I was careful not to break these and removed all 4 of them. The actual door handle mechanism itself is really just a cable in a plastic housing held on with a bracket. It comes off and then you can loop it out of the hole.
Old cars are so easy to work on.
Out of the entire interior of the B5S4, this was by far and away the worst part. Whenever you sat in the car, you would immediately draw your attention to it, and anybody who rode in the car as a passenger was hesitant to put their arm on the armrest, which is not a place I want the car to be. So I was super ecstatic to actually get this interior trim in place, and I think it really brightens up the interior overall. Installing this is just as easy as removing it, except you do it in reverse. First, you can connect the cable for the door handle and reinstall the bracket itself. After this, all you have to do is plug in the remainder of the electrical harnesses, and all of the electronics should work like new. Once the door is properly seated and you bolt it in, you're good to go and test all of the electronics and make sure that the door lever actually works.
I love it when a plan comes together.
Here you can see the other door card, and this one isn't nearly as broken as the other one. In fact, with a little bit of plastic welding and some screw replacements, I think this door is actually salvageable. As of now, I have the parts on the way to fix it, and I'll be addressing it in the next video.
So I was playing with this gorgeous interior, and then I noticed something that literally made my heart shine. Sometimes when you buy a used car, people won't clean out the CD player, and this happens to be one of the cases. But this may possibly be the best thing that I've ever found. I found an album, specifically a hip-hop album, done by the original owner, unreleased, and it's amazing. Another really cool thing about this is when I put the new door in, I actually fixed the speaker, which is wild. I didn't think I'd get a working speaker with it, but I did, and I'm not gonna complain. This is an autograph mixtape, which I presume is made by the original owner of this car, or the previous owner, and that's insane.
Now it's time to address the meat and potatoes of this specific episode, and what I mean by that is we're going to learn about paint restoration. If you're anything like me, the idea of repainting and or restoring car paint is something that's always scared you. Painting a car is something I kind of had ingrained in my mind as something that I wouldn't be able to do myself. And to be brutally honest, I still think of it as something that a professional will always be able to do better than any enthusiast. But since this car is a learning opportunity for me, I figured it would be a great time to try and learn some basic paint restoration and see if I can make this hood look at least a little bit better. My goal is to restore the shine and remove the clear coat peel as best to my ability. For reference, I have absolutely zero experience painting a car, and it's something that you can learn along with me if you like the results I obtain. I also wanted to do my very best to keep the budget of this paint restoration low so other people can try it if they like the results. The first thing I did before I did any prep work on the car was to order base and primer. I made sure to order base coat in the color that specifically matched the paint code for this car. My car specifically is a Santorin blue, and I had the paint match to that. Now's when we get into actually prepping the car for paint. All in all, my goal for this car was to primarily respray the hood and front two fenders, since those were the worst offenders on the car. I spent a few days working on this project due to lack of time with work, and consequently I spent the entire first day sanding the edges of all the peeling clear coat. My goal was not to remove entirely the clear coat that was still on the vehicle. I had two goals. One, I wanted to scuff up the clear coat enough so that it would take a layer of base and consequently clear coat after that. And two, I wanted to smooth out the transfer of areas where there was clear coat and where there was no clear coat. I wanted to be able to run my finger along it and make sure that I couldn't tell where the clear coat started and where the paint ended. I figured the smoother I could get this, the less I would see it after I had resprayed and polished the car. I quickly realized I was going to need an electric sander, otherwise this was going to take way longer than I actually had. Consequently, I spent the rest of the day taping off the areas I didn't want to sand and get paint on. Other than the clear coat, there is a really weird defect in my hood that kind of came with it when I bought the car. I made sure to spend a lot of time smoothing and sanding this area out, and I also made sure to spray primer on everywhere where there was metal exposed. Paint doesn't like to stick to metal, so that's why we use primer. I ended the first day by sanding down the primer, and the start of the next day began actually sanding the car. I used a pretty aggressive orbital sander to do the rest of this sanding. Along with the sander, I used a 400 grit mesh style sandpaper net to do most of the sanding on the edges of the clear coat. Like I said earlier, my goal was to make a smooth transition where I couldn't tell where the clear coat started and the base coat ended. I wasn't trying to remove the existing clear coat, so all I really wanted to do was make the entire surface smooth to the touch. When I was initially dreaming up doing this, my gut told me to just try it on the front two fenders and the hood, but I ended up doing it on all the other spots where there was peeling clear coat on the car, and boy am I glad I did. Painting is really difficult, and painting a car is extremely difficult. Consequently, I did a lot of research into people who have done this before, and from what I've gathered, the most important step of this is the prep work. If your surface isn't properly prepped and smooth to the point where you would like it, you're really setting yourself up for failure. So I intentionally spent a lot of time making the surface as smooth as I possibly could get it. Like I said earlier, I wanted to keep the budget low so people wouldn't feel apprehensive about trying this on their own car. Consequently, I chose to get the paint-matched paint put in an aerosol can. My main goal was to test out this because I'd heard a lot of people say that aerosol cans really don't do very well. Now, I don't think this is intrinsically a problem of the paint in the aerosol cans, because in fact it's the same paint that you would put in an actual paint sprayer. I think it really just has to do with the fact that aerosol cans, by their design, can't atomize paint nearly as efficiently as a bespoke paint sprayer. All that basically means is that the spray from an aerosol can won't be nearly as even and consistent as if you put it in an actual paint sprayer. That does not mean, however, that paint from an aerosol can won't get you a good looking finished product. You just have to work a little bit harder to get around the same results. I intentionally did about 5 or 6 coats and made sure to lightly dust each coat and apply it in layers consistently rather than just putting one heavy coat and calling it good. This approach will help minimize runs and help you get a better coverage over the entire car, as opposed to having good coverage in some spots and no coverage in other spots. After I got an adequate number of base coat layers sprayed, I went ahead and applied a few layers of Clearcoat. Keep in mind that Clearcoat sprayed out of an aerosol can in all likelihood will not look very shiny or glossy until you cut, buff, and polish the entire car the next day. Here you can see all of the layers after the first day. This includes the base coat and all of the layers of the clear coat. You can see that it is reflecting light in a very unpredictable and unmirror-like fashion. We're going to fix this by cutting, buffing, and polishing the entire car. I also took time to restore all the black on all of the grills on the S4, and I think it really helped the overall look of the car. At the end of the first day, I was pleasantly surprised. I'm happy with how the paint actually matched the car itself, but I'm not too happy so far with how the clear coat looks. In the moment, I was a little worried about the final product because there was hardly any reflection on it. I was hoping for it to be a little bit more glossy to start with, but thankfully, as you'll see in a little bit, cutting, buffing, and polishing was the key to unlocking this car's actually good finish. To avoid swirls whenever you're detailing paint on your car, you want to use a clay bar, and I picked up this synthetic clay bar for pretty cheap at AutoZone. This was going to be my first attempt and learning experience for painting, buffing, and polishing an entire car. Consequently, I wanted to make sure to use materials that anybody could afford and anybody could go out and purchase locally. Just to reiterate, my goal is not to make this a perfect fix for this. The perfect fix would be to respray the entire car or wrap it in vinyl, which I probably will do someday. This is just a way to make it look a ton better for relatively cheap. You can absolutely cut, buff, and polish by hand, however it's going to take a lot longer and the end finish probably won't be quite as good as if you used something mechanical. This is an entry-level random orbital polisher, and it is something that I can highly recommend after using it quite a bit as something that will help you make your cars look really great. My goal was to get closer to a mirror-like finish because I wasn't super happy with the finish of the clear coat that I used the other day. It didn't have any reflections, so I wanted it to be a bit glossier. Consequently, the first thing I did was clay bar the entire trunk. I then used a cutting compound on my microfiber pad, and you'll note that I'm putting a lot on because it's the first time the pad was being used. Here are the results after a few passes with the cutting compound, and then I went on to wax it afterwards, but you can already see just how much of an improvement this is making. Now, I absolutely know this is not a perfect paint restoration, but I think you and I can both admit that this looks a ton better than the peeling clear coat did. I'm also really impressed by how the paint matched the car itself. I then followed these same polishing steps on the roof, but I think this was overall the worst part of the car just because of how hard it was actually to reach. In hindsight, I'll likely be wrapping the roof black of this car anyways, so you won't see this very much. I'm just glad it's smooth and better than it was when it was peeling. My main goal and my magnum opus for this paint restoration project was to restore the front two fenders and the front hood itself. Consequently, I spent the most amount of time and effort restoring and polishing these parts of the car. Since this is likely the highest viewed part of the car, it's something I really wanted to focus on. Consequently, I spent extra time with the prep work for this part of the car, and along with that, I spent more time with the cutting compound. I also spent a lot of time with the polishing pad and the polishing wax to make sure that I could get this as close to a mirror-like finish as possible. You'll see me looking at both the reflection of my hand in the car as well as on the reflection captured by my phone camera, just because I found it helpful in identifying where blemishes on the paint were. After I was done with the buffing compound, I was pretty impressed with the finish already, but it still needed quite a bit of work. You can absolutely tell the difference between areas where I cut, buffed, and polished and areas where I haven't yet just by looking at the reflection and how clear it is. What you're basically doing when you're cutting, buffing, and polishing something is removing the top uneven layer of the clear coat. All this mechanical rotation that is applied over and over really smooths out the appearance, and consequently it can reflect light without refracting it and bending it in ways you don't want it to. This leads to a much clearer reflection and that glossy finish that we all know and love. Freshly sprayed paint, and especially that sprayed by a complete amateur in an outdoor environment, is not going to have a glossy finish to begin with. This is something you have to cut, buff, and work towards, so it requires a lot of manual effort, but the result is totally worth it. I honestly spent a few days cutting, buffing, and polishing the hood over and over and over again, reclaying and repolishing just to make it as nice as I possibly could. This is not a perfect car and this is not a perfect paint job, but I'm really starting to like how this process worked. It's really satisfying and really fulfilling to see a hood that was hard to look at before start to look like something that is actually rather nice. Will I have to redo this sometime in the future because of rock chips, or I just don't like how it ended up? Yeah, most likely, but I'll have a lot more skill doing it the next time, and I'll do it in a much better environment with an actual paint sprayer. This was my first step into delving into this kind of a process, and boy, was it actually a lot of fun. And to be brutally honest, in the environment I had with the skills I had to begin with, I am not half mad with the results. This car looks tremendously better than it did with the peeling clear coat, and I'm honestly really happy with how it's starting to turn out. It's starting to look more like my Project B5 that I've dreamed about, and not like a project car that still needs an immense amount of work. If I were to do this over again, I would spend even more time sanding and make sure that I get more even base coats applied to the car. The results I got are great, but if I spent just a little bit more time prepping, it would turn out even better. Well, there you have it. This is my 2000 B5 S4 after the paint restoration that I attempted, and I hope you think it looks as good as I do. The paint is not perfect by any means, but boy is this car pretty now compared to when it had the peeling clear coat. I think this was absolutely worth my time and effort, and I highly suggest it if you're on the fence about trying it yourself. Worst case scenario, it is a fantastic opportunity to learn. I want to thank you so very much for watching. The support you guys are giving me is absolutely unreal, and it motivates me to keep going and making these videos. If you enjoyed the video or learned something, consider liking and subscribing for more. I have a lot of plans for this car in the near future, and I am excited for you to join me. Once again, thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful day.